Us here today for our very first College of Engineering Associate Dean Speaker Series. As you know, we are unable to see your smiling faces, but please know that as panelists, Dr. Franchetti and I can see your names. So rest assured, we know that you're here and we look forward to your participation. Many of you may already know me, but if not, my name is Jennifer Hall, and I serve as the Director of Development for the University of Toledo Foundation, where I have the honor of working very closely with the College of Engineering. As I already mentioned, we are unable to see your video and hear your audio. However, you can freely chat with us by using the chat box, which you should already be able to see on your screen. However, if you don't see it, just go to the bottom right-hand corner of your screen where you should be able to see a little chat icon. Once you click on it, the chat panel will appear. This is how you will be able to submit questions directly to Dr. Franchetti and to me throughout today's event. And as a quick mention, if you want to change the view on your screen, you might want to expand it or just see someone who's talking, just head to the right upper hand corner and you will see an option to expand or reduce your screen. If you have any issues at all, or you just want to send a chat message to me at any point, I can help you out. Okay, let's switch gears and get things started by welcoming our guest of honor, Dr. Franchetti. Some of you may know him like me, however, I certainly was not aware of all of his accomplishments. Dr. Franchetti is a professor of mechanical, industrial, and manufacturing engineering and associate dean of undergraduate studies for the College of Engineering. He is also the director of the Environmentally Conscious Design and Manufacturing Laboratory and leads sustainability research for the manufacturing industry with funding from the EPA, or the United States Environmental Protection Agency, the Ohio EPA, the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, and Lucas County. He has published 5 textbooks and over 60 research papers related to his sustainability research work. He earned his bachelor's, master's, and PhD from the University of Toledo in industrial engineering, as well as an MBA, all from our very own University of Toledo. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Franchetti.
Great, thank you, Jen, for the kind introduction, and it is a pleasure to be here with you virtually. Virtual sessions have become a big part of my life over the past year, as I'm sure they have become a big part of your work life as well. I was able to review the attendee list, and we have quite a few industrial guests attending the presentation, and many from manufacturing and the automotive industry. I have a great deal of respect for the automotive industry. It is a very significant industry in Northwest Ohio. In my mind, the automotive industry is one of the most sophisticated, competitive, and fast-paced industries on the planet. In many circumstances, it comes down to trying to save pennies on a single part or assembly that may translate into many of $1,000s over the life of a contract. I had a rude awakening to this fact in the 1990s when, as a graduate assistant on a research project, we were working with Chrysler in Toledo, Ohio to help reduce waste and increase recycling. At that time, we were looking at containers that assemblies arrived in from suppliers. They were using cardboard containers that a supplier would then break down and trash in a dumpster to be sent to the landfill. Our team investigated methods to reduce, reuse, and recycle this waste and presented our findings to the Chrysler management team as very excited young students. We did not even get to our 4th slide of the presentation before the plant manager stood up and said that Chrysler is in the business of making cars, not handling waste and recycling. He said our system works fine, and he walked out of the meeting, abruptly ending it. From that experience, our research team started with a new mindset and approach that we called the 2 E's, environment and economics. We would start every presentation with the 2 E's. We would propose solutions that would help the environment and at a minimum, break even economically for the company, and in most cases, generate a positive rate of return. A few months later, we returned to Chrysler and started with the 2 E's and a plan for them to switch to returnable containers instead of cardboard. We found an annual cost reduction of $75,000 over a 4-year period and an internal rate of return of nearly 10%, not to mention solid waste reduction of many tons of cardboard diverted from the local landfill every year. At that time, we realized we needed to speak the language of industry. You cannot jump in with a tree hugger pitch and expect change or buy-in at that time. Now let's fast forward to 2021, and we have a very different business environment and its relationship to sustainability. The cost pressure and need to economically justify all projects are still present, but there is a push and a pull towards sustainability and environmental protection. A big reason for this change was the shift from the industrial era to the information age. This shift started in the 1970s and continues today. In the knowledge economy, workers are not rewarded for working with their hands, but for their work with their minds and problem-solving skills. Information is readily accessible with social media, and it is very visible and can spread very quickly like wildfire. People know almost immediately if there are big successes or failures, and this can lead to businesses and individuals shifting behaviors. I will share a few of these stories with you next. In fact, this rapid visibility has created a phenomena known as greenwashing, where a company portrays that they are protecting the environment publicly, but when you look closely into the claims, you see falsehoods. Just in recent history, several companies were found to be greenwashing. For example, Tide detergent claimed they were using a plant-based detergent. And then in 2020, the Ad Council recommended they discontinue this unsupported message. Another example is with Nestle. They claimed all cocoa beans were sustainably sourced. They lost a 2019 class action lawsuit as this claim could not be substantiated. Now let's take a look at the push and the pull. First, there is a push from younger generations graduating high school in recent years. In fact, in higher education, our newest and fastest growing engineering degree is our environmental engineering degree, growing at a rate of about 12% per year. The Gen Z students, which is the 18 to 25-year-old demographic, are highly concerned about environmental protection and rated climate change as a top fear. Keep this in mind because these are our future leaders. In terms of the pull, industry is now needing the sustainability and environmental engineering skill set to perform business functions and are paying a median salary of nearly 6 figures with numerous jobs posting. The need for sustainability and environmental engineering skill set has been heavily covered in the news lately. Recently in the news, President Biden pledged to cut U.S. greenhouse gas emissions by 50% by 2030, and state governors are urging for zero emission car sales by 2035, as reported by NPR. Speaking of the automotive industry, in the news, they are not just standing still. GM announced they will only sell zero emission vehicles by 2035, and Ford vowed to phase out gas cars in Europe by 2030 to protect the environment and slow climate change. Dana Incorporated, headquartered in Toledo, also has made several newsworthy announcements recently related to sustainability and environmental protection. Several partnerships were announced to advance its electrified powertrain business to leverage sustainable solutions to reduce environmental impact. In fact, the University of Toledo, we work closely with Dana Incorporated to create a graduate level certificate and MS program related to mechatronics that is offered in person, on site, and virtually. A few years ago, Dana leadership was very blunt with us at UToledo and said, you are not creating the engineers that can work from day one in our electrification fields. Dana stated that they needed mechanical engineers to be trained like electrical engineers and electrical engineers to be trained like mechanical engineers. The mechatronics program helped to fill this gap, and it was recently added as a concentration for our Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering. This is in direct response of higher education responding to the needs of industry, with the original catalyst being Dana advancing the electrified powertrain business based on the needs of the big three automotive companies, government regulation, and preferences and consumer demand. Now I'd like to shift gears a bit, and please pardon the pun. This is Bianca Ingalls. He is one of the world's top architects. His quote is in reference to the architectural field, but it really could apply to all fields in 2021. Notice that in the past, like I mentioned in my opening story with Chrysler, in the 1990s, sustainability was viewed as a sacrifice or political dilemma, not a factor intentionally considered during the engineering design process. I would like to share with you a few of Ingalls' designs that highlight his creativity and his focus on sustainability. These pictures on the left are of the VIA 57 West residential building in Manhattan. Notice the unique design and ability to get natural light to much of the building. The top pictures on the right are concept art. Notice the intentional green space. The building in the lower right is the Eisenberg Business School at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. It has a green roof and a staggered design that provides skylights and windows. It was constructed from using reused materials as well. Again, this is Ingalls treating sustainability as a design challenge. Now we have a question for the audience. So we'll have an interactive portion here. What are some common engineering design challenges for industry? So you can think of the automotive industry moving towards zero emission vehicles or electrifying drivetrains, and enter your thoughts into the chat. So again, what are some common engineering design challenges that you are aware of in industry? And I'll ask you to put those in the chat, please. And again, and you can send the chat to everyone, just type it in, we'll read a couple of those, and then we'll move on with our presentation. So we do have one, economics came up exactly. There's a big driver for economics. Safety is a huge one that many are concerned with. Getting different types of engineers and other professionals to integrate their portions into the design. So cross-functional teams is a great one. Fuel economy is a big one that pops out. Time is a big one. There's typically limited time. What materials are available, what we've experienced during the pandemic, supply chain issues can be a big challenge as well. So thank you for putting those in the chat. I greatly appreciate that. Now, how can sustainability be viewed as a design challenge in the manufacturing industry? Think about how Ingalls treated it as an intentional challenge in the architectural field. Please enter your thoughts in the chat and we'll read a few aloud. So again, think about now sustainability as a design challenge. How can that be overcome? As related to the manufacturing industry or other industries. So what are some sustainability design challenges? Cost of battery replacement, that's actually a very good one. Life cycle of a product, how is it recyclable? That's a great one as well. And when we're talking about end of life, is there a demanufacturing process that you can use as opposed to it going to a landfill? Emissions, life cycle assessment has been mentioned as well. There's a lot to manage and measure as you go through this, the impact of waste, your choice of materials on weight, which will then impact fuel usage. So that's a really great one someone sent me privately. So again, we can see that many design challenges as it relates to sustainability can be intentionally considered during the design process. Now moving on, what I'd like to take a look at is how the profession of engineering has addressed sustainability and environmental protection. The American Society of Mechanical Engineering maintains a code of conduct for engineering in the form of fundamental canons. These have been unchanged for a number of years until recently. You can see they address the importance of public safety, competence, the need for professional development, and conflicts of interest. Fairness, reputation, and objectivity are also covered. And now the newest canon, highlighted in red, environmental protection, is now a component of the code of ethics with the new number 8 that you see highlighted. Now, in terms of challenges down the road, each year the National Academy of Engineering identifies critical emerging challenges for engineering. They introduced 14 challenges recently, and 6 were directly related to sustainability as one of the 4 cross-cutting themes. These 6 challenges were related to the economics of solar energy, access to clean water, energy from fusion, recycling waste, and carbon sequestration. The purpose of the carbon sequestration directly relates to reducing the use of fossil fuels in turn to prevent and reduce climate change. I would now like to show you a short video from the National Academy of Engineering related to sustainability. I will show the video on my end, but Jen has just put the video YouTube link in if you are unable to hear it or see it as I play it. So again, I will share that with you now. And again, if you're unable to hear it or see it, please click on the link that Jen just put into the chat for everyone. I will share my screen now with you.
Very best engineer there is. Nature's had
Hey Matt, it's Jen.
Yeah.
I'm thinking that I've gotten some feedback that the video was a little glitchy and we couldn't really hear it. It was the case for me too. So I'm thinking that we should take an opportunity to click on the link.
Okay, great idea. So what I'll do, if you'd like to click on the link now, the video is about 2.5 minutes. So we'll give you about 2.5 minutes or so to view the video, and then we'll move on with the presentation.
Thanks, Matt. Okay, Matt, I'm thinking everybody should probably be back about now.
Great. Yeah, it's been about the 2.5 minutes. So again, that is from the National Academy of Engineering. And again, they create grand challenges for the future group of engineers coming up through the pipeline. So again, they are looking at these are the main challenges that we need to view and need to understand as we are trying to protect the planet and focus on sustainability. And we do have some challenges. So again, they're saying the older generations create the challenges and problems that the younger generations must solve. And this is a challenge right now in terms of solid waste. So you're looking at two countries, one that's considered developed, the US, and one that's considered developing, India. And what you'll notice based on the population size is that we are looking at some trends in the developing countries where they're looking at increases in the amount of waste that they are generating each year. We've noticed some slight flatlining or declines in developing countries like the US, but again, you can see the problems that are being maintained as we move forward. The picture on the left is a typical dumping ground in India, and the picture on the right is a landfill that you'd find in the US. So again, this is a worldwide problem as countries begin to develop, and we see increases in the amount of waste that's being created and disposed of. And now to focus on the US slightly, what you're looking at are some statistics from the US EPA. The chart on the left is the municipal solid waste generation rate. So this is trash that's going to the landfill. And you can notice that the waste generation has been increasing since 1960 and started to flatline a little bit. As per capita increased, flatline had a slight decrease and now showed a bit of a jump in the last available data. The graph on the right takes a look at recycling and composting rates. And again, not exactly great news because we're beginning to see a flatlining of the total amount of waste that's being recycled, and we're seeing a drop in the per capita generation recycled and composted. So again, we're seeing a decreasing trend there. So again, some concerning things to focus on. So again, the need for the sustainability relates for companies that it can improve financial position, create cleaner, healthier environments, and again, enhance the company's image without the issues of greenwashing. We're actually doing something to protect the environment. And now I just want to share a few stories with you recently in the news. So you're looking at some beautiful pictures of Napoli, Italy. It was actually rated as the third most beautiful Bay Area in the world in a recent travel magazine, just behind San Francisco Bay and Rio de Janeiro. You can see they're well known for their foods that you can see in the lower left, and just beautiful scenery, landscape, skies, mountains. If we take a look about 10 years ago, there was actually a garbage crisis in Naples, Italy. There were more than 10,000 tons of trash that had nowhere to go. The available dumps were at capacity, the incinerator was not working, and trash just began to pile up in the streets. So you can see a young woman with trash just standing behind her. The next pictures I think are a little more telling. If you look at the picture in the middle, you can see literally there is no more space to put the trash in this empty vacant building. And the streets are lined on the left. They really did not have an alternate solution. It got so bad that the residents revolted and actually burned garbage trucks that you can see in the lower right corner. Again, this is an out of sight, out of mind problem, but as soon as the garbage is that visible, it creates these type of issues and these type of concerns. Also, we're talking about climate change and sustainability overall. We've mentioned the need for the automotive industry to electrify, reduce its carbon footprint, go zero emissions. And one thing that scientists have drawn a correlation between is global warming and some phenomena that's not great, including some weather patterns and so forth. And in Toledo, we're not immune. As you can see in this story, we're breaking records in terms of heat year after year. Recently, extreme weather patterns that could be droughts that you see in the lower left corner, or it can be high impact, high intensity storms. You're looking at Hurricane Katrina, the eye of it, that is about to hit New Orleans. So again, it's creating these extreme weather phenomena that are making things difficult around the world, including India. So about 20 years ago, flooding wasn't very common, but now in Mumbai, it's a common thing during the rainy monsoon season that floods are just expected. And again, scientists have been able to correlate that to climate change. And I mentioned the US and Hurricane Katrina, one of the most expensive and deadly storms that we've had ever hit, went directly through the city center of New Orleans, causing catastrophic damage, loss of life, and so forth. And again, even just a slight degree in the temperature of the earth creates more energy in the atmosphere that leads to these strong superstorms that can cause the damage that you see here, fueling the need to reduce carbon emissions. And in the Midwest, we have our own issues. You can see Tornado Alley here. Again, we're seeing more frequent tornado warnings and touchdowns across the US and even into the deeper South where they weren't as common. A quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson: "The civilized man has built a coach, but lost the use of his feet." And really, I like to relate this to a modern needs. If we were to look back in the 1800s when Ralph Waldo Emerson was alive, he wouldn't have imagined airplanes. He wouldn't have imagined the vehicles that we have on the roads and the problems related to these things, such as the emissions that we're talking about now and the need to control climate change. So again, this is more a modern needs thing, that we now have all these great modern things in front of us, but what is the cost? What is the damage that has been done? And that's what we want to think about from the sustainability perspective on a day-to-day and in our business lives. And really a big macro level way to look at that is through the systems approach. So any system, any business is comprised of three basic components. You have your inputs, land, capital, labor. You have a system that's adding value, creating something that somebody wants, in addition to some non-valuated process. And then on the back end, we have the outputs. So desired product or service, we have waste that potentially can go to the landfill. And the thing that we encourage people to focus on, something that you may think is a waste, may be of value for another company that they could use as part of their raw materials. And that's essentially what we call closing the loop. If you can do that internally, if you can partner with other companies to be in a position to be able to do that. And we're not just concerned about the Earth's temperature increasing and the storms, we're also concerned about our water supply. So this was an interesting statistic I was able to pull the other day, that 21% of the world's fresh water supply is literally within walking distance of many of us that are on this call today, 21%. Some environmental concerns have been due to the coal-fired power plants. When it settles, it's leaving amounts of mercury within the water that have created a situation where the fish can only be eaten in small quantities if the mercury levels are too high. The industry has done some great things to reduce this, but several years ago, this was a big concern. And I mentioned extreme weather conditions earlier, where we're having Hurricane Katrina that's flooding vast amounts of the region. We're also seeing extreme drought. This was just reported last week that 85% of California is already under severe, extreme, or exceptional drought. Last year, only 12% of the country was at that, or 12% of California was at that drought level. And they're also now, again, looking at water restrictions based on the drought levels. And I mentioned we have 21% of the world's fresh water supply just next door to us. There are also concerns about our Great Lakes. There's concern that users could withdraw and are withdrawing from our inland lakes, streams, and rivers at a faster rate than it's being replaced, particularly during summer. So again, this is the opposite of sustainability. If you're using more than is being replenished in this case. So again, this is something that's a concern, something to keep an eye on. And it's not just in the US. I've highlighted a quote here at the bottom that relates to Yemen and the Middle East. Groundwater depletion rates are so rapid in their capital that the city could effectively run out of water by 2025. That's less than 3 or 4 years away from where we are now, again, based on estimates from hydrology experts. The US military and other groups have actually developed maps that are tracking water scarcity. There's concern that the next world wars will not be over oil, they're going to be over fresh water supply. And you can see based on this map, here are the countries that have been identified as at risk in terms of scarce or stress, in terms of having potentially limited water supplies. So again, sustainability is really looking everything on this planet, including our water supplies, including the carbon emissions and global warming. Which now we tie into what can we do about this? So what are some things that we can do to make a change, either in our personal lives or our professional lives? And I feel a good starting point is, what is the definition of sustainability? And the first thing I should say, there are over 1,000 definitions of it and growing. What I'd like to start with is one of the very first definitions that was ever created by the UN. And the definition that you can read is to meet the needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. So not withdrawing more water from Lake Erie than is being replenished would be an example of that. One that's really hit home well with businesses is something called the triple bottom line. And this is where you are focusing on solutions that are good for economics, good for the environment, and also socially acceptable, that they do all three at the same time. And I'll give an example. We were working with the Toledo Metro Parks a while back, and they were looking at some budget issues. They wanted to do better for the environment. They had trash cans located throughout their parks, and they were paying to have the waste collected, drawn away and taken to a landfill for disposal. They had the idea to, let's remove the trash cans. That way we are, as a park, are generating less waste. The idea is people will bring less food and less things they need to throw away or bring it home with them. So we are reducing that footprint. So is that good for the environment? Yes. As far as the parks are concerned, They are reducing the amount of waste that's being created. Is it good economically? Yes. They've now just cut their landfill, their waste hauling bill, very much so. Now let's look at that social component. Socially, was this acceptable? Did it hit the triple bottom line? And the answer is no, that park guests were very upset to the point they would write letters and emails or even leave trash around the park because they were upset that they went for a picnic. Now there's nowhere to put this. So that's a case where someone made a solution that hit the economic and environmental aspects, but from that social piece of the triple bottom line, it wasn't a connection and didn't hit home. So really the sustainability in higher education, there's a relationship that we need to focus on with students. So a student is both a customer and a product of a university. So they choose to come to, say, the University of Toledo for their 4 or 5 years of education, and then they become a product the day that they walk out that door or apply for a co-op. And we need to look at both of these. And again, we're seeing the push from students interested in making a positive difference and industry trying to pull students in the sustainability field into this area. And again, the push, again, environmental engineering, as I mentioned towards the start of the presentation, the fastest growing degree in the College of Engineering. And one thing that it focuses on, we've always heard the term reduce your carbon footprint. What this program is focusing on is to create a positive handprint. So as opposed to just saying, let's reduce what we're doing, how can we make things better? And again, I mentioned early on that Generation Z has that concern over global warming and what does that mean for their future? And the pull, I did mention this too, that industry is looking to pull more in. We're seeing a pretty rapid growth rate of 12% in the field per year. Source Yahoo Finance. So one thing that we're doing differently, so we're talking about some practices for engineers. We're also talking about the role of education. One thing in the College of Engineering that we're very proud of, we recently became a Keen school, which means we have access to resources and different things to help train and educate our engineers to be able to make a difference from the very first day that they start working in a facility. And again, it's not necessarily related to sustainability, but it can be. What they really want to focus on is what's called EML, which is entrepreneurially minded learning, meaning that students will have a skill set and from day one look to be very curious in a new facility, make connections very quickly with ways that they can make changes and then create value very early on. So we're looking to instill these skill sets through programming projects and presentations to get our students into a position where they're able to do this. And one way that we do that, we look at this intersection to make a positive difference in the world, if it's with sustainability, if it is with this Keen relationship that we have. And really, they say it's an intersection of 3 different things. Having a problem that matters, that very well could be our issues with global warming, having an existing technology available, and then being innovative to be able to connect the two together in a way that will create some type of business. So again, problems that matter, being innovative, and using existing technology. So if you can enter this into the chat, does anyone know what this man is holding in his hand? If you have an idea, just drop it into the chat. What do you think he's holding in his hand? If anyone has any idea, just feel free to drop a comment in. I see a sharpener. It's like a pencil sharpener. It does look a little bit like a pencil sharpener. Any other ideas from anyone what he's holding in his hand? And what's interesting, the photo is too small for old eyes. Someone said a pump as well. So again, it's kind of interesting, and people probably don't know who he is, but he has one of so I'm asking for a bigger picture. This is the only one that I've got. Someone said a spark plug. It does look a little bit like that. But moving on, I'll tell you what he's holding in his hand, and you've probably never heard of him, but he has made a huge contribution to the world. This is physicist Theodore Maiman, and he created the world's first laser using a synthetic ruby crystal in May of 1960 at the Hughes Research Lab in California. The only problem is no one knew what to do with it back in 1960. It wasn't until almost 20 years later that someone knew what to do from a business perspective. It took identifying a problem that mattered, an existing technology that's been around for 20 years, lasers in this case, and innovation from engineers. Now, Lasers are a critical component in many items that we use every day, from fiber optics to barcode readers to advanced manufacturing, including the use of lasers in manufacturing. So again, this shows the intersection between the three. So some key points to innovate as an engineer, and this is actually some items that came out from a Keen presentation that we were with, that we try to instill within our students, is that good and bad ideas may not be distinguishable at the onset due to high uncertainty. So Mayman probably had no idea what this was going to do 20 years later and even into 2020. So it's hard to say what is going to make that big difference. And being right is harder than not being right. So what we try to educate the students is, you don't necessarily need to lock in on one pathway, one solution to solve something or one intention. Like in this case with the laser, it took 20 years before it was able to show high level value in business settings. And then finally, repurposing something else for something new has led to many new breakthroughs, including laser machining in this example. Bitcoin is a great example as well of that. If you think about Bitcoin, it's or cryptocurrency, it's a combination of existing technologies. Napster file sharing along with SSL internet security protocols. The same thing for electrical vehicles. Batteries existed for a number of years before electrified cars hit the market. It was a combination of existing technology, engineering innovation, and a problem that mattered, in this case, mitigating climate change, for that to take hold. So what I want to do here next is just talk about a few principles for practicing engineers. I recently wrote a textbook with 2 of my PhD students related to creating value through sustainable manufacturing. And now I'd like to share a few of these principles with you from the book that you may put into practice. The first area that I'd like to talk about is waste minimization and recycling. And this is a really area that's been around for a number of years, looking at ways to increase recycling, reduce waste going to the landfills. A lot of our research work involved working with the US EPA, where we would work with companies that had some waste streams and find ways to be able to reduce it. And what we found having student teams go into facilities is that they came in with fresh eyes, that many of the existing employees had, I guess, blinders on, in a sense, that they just said, this is the way we've always done things, where the new students would come in and be able to recognize opportunities, first by understanding what the goal is. Are we looking to minimize waste overall, or is there one product that you're having an issue with and you'd like to find a way to handle it in a better environmental way? A good example would be Nestle. We worked with them when I was a graduate student, actually, and they had large bags that cocoa would come in for their processing for cereal. So we worked with them specifically on just that item. Can we find a new home for this? The old adage, one man's trash is another man's treasure type of scenario. So we were able to find a company that actually wanted these bags in the area. The second thing with really any management process would be to create a baseline and understand, what are we doing right now? What are our levels in terms of cost and waste? And what do our process maps look like? What are the generation points for this waste? And what's the end of life of this waste? Is it being recycled? Is it being sent to a landfill? I mentioned the 2 E's at the beginning of the presentation. So determining expenses and revenues are a big piece. So people will say, hey, well, I don't have a budget to recycle, or I don't have a budget to deal with any type of waste minimization. And the answer is yes, you do. You're already paying for waste to be removed. Typically, we found some pretty major cost savings for companies just looking at the collection pattern for their waste and how often their dumpsters being pulled. So again, there is a budget. It's just identifying how that's being used and managed. Then again, look to identify opportunities and economic impacts, select the processes. And then the big piece, again, is similar to closing that loop. You need to continually monitor it and improve it. So you need to make sure that it's staying where it needs to stay. And just on a side note, I do have a team of research assistants that I work with Lucas County, where we do perform no-cost waste assessments for businesses within Lucas County. So feel free to reach out to me. My contact information has been provided if you have a company that would like one of these no-cost confidential waste assessments. Another area in the book that we look at for companies is related to energy resource management. So this is a case, we work closely with Energy Star. They have some great auditing tools, both electronic and in written form, to help companies understand what is their current status of energy and how that relates to carbon emissions, depending on how the energy is generated. For example, in this area of Ohio and in Michigan, much of our power is generated from coal-fired power plants. So if you're able to reduce your energy usage, there's a corresponding reduction in the amount of emissions associated with the power generation from the source. So to do this, it's very similar to a waste assessment. You look at the current performance and energy consumptions in a facility-wide audit, Energy Star has some really great reports that will walk a team through how to be able to do that. One thing that's helped a lot of companies that we work with are to benchmark best practices in your industry. Are there some great things that people have done to reduce the use of energy or use alternative energy such as solar or wind? Identify opportunities for cost reduction, perform the economic analyses. One of the challenges of the energy resource management is that some of the recommended changes may have high upfront costs. So you're looking at a higher payback period potentially, and having that capital to be able to invest to do that may be a challenge as well. Identify areas for improvement, again, conduct the analyses, prepare the report, the implementation, and again, finally, monitor and improve the processes as you go through. And the last area that I want to highlight is related to green supply chain management. And a lot of what our team looks at when we're involved in these projects is from ISO 14001. So it's a quality management system that directly corresponds to the environment. And some things that we take a look at with companies are their closed loop manufacturing resource planning that can happen. And closing the loop essentially means that you could be responsible for the end life of that product as it comes through. So it's being recycled, your consumer's done with it. How can you get that back to the front end of your process to become a new product as you move through? Optimization modeling is actually a really interesting one as well in terms of supply chain. Is there a way that you can minimize the amount of traveling that you're doing within your supply chain? Again, this has been around for a number of years, since the 1950s. Ways that you can reduce fuel usage, larger loads to be able to move between facilities within supply chains. Inventory control, what are your reorder points? If you have an economic reorder point, when does that happen? How often is it happening? Could that be changed to help you lower the environmental impact for a company? Supplier management, many companies now have criteria when they work with a supplier that they do have certain things in place related to environmental protection, and that can be outlined in specific contracts. Adhering to environmental policy legal requirements is also one that we're seeing more related to. And one thing that has hit the news over the past 5 or 6 years are facilities going to what's called zero waste. So they want zero waste to go to landfill. So anything that's coming out of that plant will be recycled or reused or composted. And a big challenge with this has been food waste. It's one of the more difficult items to compost. It's, again, difficult to process. It can rot. There can be some issues associated with that. But again, companies have gone to on-site or off-site composting to be able to truly go to a zero waste format. So closing thoughts for my presentation, so we have some time for questions here, are really to think of sustainability as a design challenge. So the way that Ingalls intentionally used sustainability concepts into his design. It wasn't a dilemma. It wasn't something I had to figure out. He intentionally put that into the design process. And also, you must speak in the language of those you are trying to sell your ideas, either your manager or your customers, with the triple bottom line. As I mentioned in my opening Chrysler story, does it make economic sense? Will it help the environment? Will people respond positively to it, internally and externally? So will it get the Facebook thumbs up or the angry emoji? Again, these are things that need to be taken into account. And then finally, think of the 3 C's when innovating. How can you be curious to make new connections with existing technologies to solve problems that matter and will create value, like Bitcoin and the lasers? So I would like to thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Matt, I'm seeing some in the chat panel, and then also, we received some questions in advance?
Yes, I did. And actually, so when you registered for the presentation, you had the option to ask a question. So a few of those did come in. So what I'd like to do is just read a few of those with some quick answers, and then maybe we can move to the chat. So one question was, how will sustainability change the way we engineer our world as we move closer to reducing our carbon footprint? And I think this question ties directly into thinking of sustainability as a design challenge, not a constraint or dilemma. Europe is far more advanced in this area than the US. So if we can look to them to see our future, closed loop processes, our expectations, and the norm. For example, in Germany, auto manufacturers are responsible for the end of the life of the vehicle, that they need to show that they're accounting for that. It's not ending up in a junkyard somewhere. They do have some type of demanufacturing process to reuse and recycle what they can from that. So I think that's one thing that we're seeing as we move closer to that. Another question that we had is, in the current COVID situation and contactless work scenario, how is it possible to follow and know whether the sustainability concepts are implemented in workstations where social gathering is limited? So I mean, this is a great question, a pandemic related question. And I think we've seen many companies and institutions have gone to a remote work. So we're seeing less people in the office over the past year or so. So again, hopefully this will be in the past in the very near future as we're opening back up in America and many places of the world. But looking at the building as a process generating value added products and waste, one way to see if this is happening is to walk to the back dock and look at the dumpsters and recycling bins to see how full they are, to see if there are any, compare that waste to what had been generated previously. If it's related to energy, compare energy bills and the amount of kilowatt hours used over a period of time. And again, the pandemic period and COVID, I think, is going to have an asterisk for all of this because business was disrupted, that many people were, again, working remotely during this time. Let's see, I think we've got two more questions that came in to begin with. There appears to be problems with supply chains around the world. Given that our economic inflation predicament, will manufacturing cost effectively localize, reducing their carbon footprint, or will the labor shortage just force companies to wait? Yeah, I think that's a really great question that during COVID, supply chains were massively disrupted due to facilities shut down, worker illness, and increased demand for e-commerce. So there were some big disruptions, big stories about the US Postal Service. So as we come out of the pandemic, we should see things return to a little more normal, in my opinion. If a company are able to secure more localized relationships within their supply chains, I do see them having an incentive to do it. The US labor cost versus labor costs in other countries is still a larger driver for US companies. Given that the two driving factors for many US companies are financial statements and government regulations, that there's most likely incentives for companies to continue to have international relationships due to that labor cost piece. That again, for their financial statements, it's going to show a benefit if they're able to do it cheaper, let's say overseas than here in the US. I remember a few years ago, I was in India teaching, and I was flying internally within India, and pretty much on the plane were all business people. And they were essentially looking to establish manufacturing operations within India, primarily due to the cost. I mean, it was very interesting speaking with them from that business perspective related to why and the economics here. So I think we've got two more questions. How can software engineers play an impactful role in sustainability? So this is a great question too. Earlier in the presentation, I mentioned optimization models. If a software engineer could create consumer or business packages to monitor and reduce environmental impact, it could help to achieve goals. So software to monitor, reduce energy usage could also be needed. I had some funding probably 5 or 6 years ago from the USPA working with a group of students, and we created something called the Green Box to reduce food waste. And just a very 30-second snapshot of it, it basically was like Redbox where you can get DVD from, but instead of taking DVDs out of it, you would put your food waste into it. It would weigh the food waste. And then based on how much you were able to put into the box to be composted or sent to anaerobic digestion, you would get certain points. And then based on these points, you would get rewards from vendors that were considered green. And we actually worked with a team of computer science engineers to develop an app that could track this and monitor that. So I think there are great opportunities for software engineers to play a role in sustainability. And the last question that we had from the chat was earning all your degrees at UToledo in any way a disadvantage to your career? So as mentioned in the intro that my degrees are from UT, the short answer to that I would say is no, but that being said, I left academia for about 5 years and worked in the automotive field as an engineer, and then for the US Postal Service as an engineer and manager. Many times in academia, the expectation is that faculty members have diversified experiences at several institutions to bring new ideas, and I was able to accomplish this in industry. What's interesting in industry, after you've had a few years of experience, they stop asking what school did you graduate from and start asking what results have you gotten in the past and what results do you expect to bring here. So in full honesty, I was not considering graduate school until my final semester as an undergrad, and some of you may know him, Bob Bennett, stopped me after class one day as an undergraduate and asked me if I'd like to be an undergraduate research assistant in his lab that performed these waste audits. And the rest was really history from there.
Thanks, Matt. Does that completes the questions that you received in the registration in advance, right?
That's right, Jen.
Okay, great. Well, we do have some questions that came up in the chat. One of them is regarding global warming and how much of it is due to the change in the planetary tilt. Is the tilt effect worse due to the ice caps melting?
That's a really great question, and I am not an expert in that, so I don't know if I can offer, a strong opinion. What I can say is that they have drawn correlations to some of the weather patterns that we're seeing and the increase in the temperature. But I do agree with the question. There are other things happening within the planet, the Earth, that could be contributing potentially to the global warming, including the tilt.
All right, thanks. Here's another one from Dean Toole. Sustainability and safety have traditionally been the responsibility of the EHS manager. This makes sense given the triple bottom line, but both the sustainability and safety have grown in visibility and complexity. Do you think corporations should still have them managed by one EHS officer?
That's a great question. I think we're seeing both. When I worked for the US Postal Service, that was the case that one individual did. But speaking with colleagues that I have, and actually speaking with some of our corporate partners, they've begun to hire chief sustainability officers, someone that is at that same level as a chief information officer or a vice president. Now they're responsible for the footprint. I know working with Dana, I had a chance to present to their engineers about a month or two ago, and they have that in place. I know Owens Corning does, Owen, Illinois. So again, it's something that is considered pretty paramount. And again, it's both from what is the customer expectation and also from regulatory compliance with government laws. It's very much so needed.
So it sounds like we're going to see more and more chief sustainability officers. Yeah. I don't see any more questions in the chat. Do you have any that came into you privately?
No, I do not.
So we'll give people an opportunity to ask more questions just for another, minute or so here. Here we go. Let's see. You're getting accolades. That's nice. Not at all surprising. You're gonna have to help me out here. Is it 1.2 T stimulus package? What is that? I don't know what that means. Does it?
The stimulus package related to coronavirus recovery funds. I've not looked too closely at it. I've seen a broad view of it. I did not see anything that specifically related to necessarily sustainability. I mean, I guess as a byproduct that's maybe not intended, that we have a situation where employees were able to receive additional unemployment benefits. So we don't have as many people necessarily in their vehicles driving to and from work. So in a sense, that has some type of environmental improvement aspect related to it as well.
Great. I see another question here. Is the growth in robotics good for the triple bottom line?
Yeah, that's a good question. That looking at robotics, I guess I'd have to answer that question with it kind of depends. So we have to look at the workforce essentially. So if we're looking at kind of a life cycle analysis of any product or project, we need to look at all the inputs coming into it. So if you do have, let's say, people driving from long areas in vehicles or flying to be able to work within a facility, that it could reduce the impact if you do have a robot that's now performing that work. The downside of the robots, though, depending on the size and how often it's running, does use energy. So I guess the question is, where is that energy coming from? Is it from renewable sources? Is it off the grid from a coal-fired power plant? So I guess to answer that question, it's kind of a depends looking at the factors. It would be that comparison between the two.
Got it. Okay, we got clarification in terms of the stimulus question. I'm not sure that it changed anything, but we got clarification in terms of the new proposed package by President Biden. Does that alter your answer?
And again, I haven't looked at it very closely, but I have not seen any broad strokes that directly relate necessary to the stimulus and helping the environment. But again, it's something I haven't looked at too deeply yet.
Sure. In your opinion, do you think the United States should adopt a carbon tax system?
Yeah, that's a really great question too, that probably 10, 15 years ago that the world was essentially proposing that there should be a carbon tax. If you're generating beyond your limit, you have to pay into the system, or you have to find a company that has extra and you essentially buy it from them. And again, it really did not get traction in the US, that people were essentially against it. But now that we're looking at what the state of the world is, and we're looking to move towards these electrified vehicles and zero emissions, maybe now is the time to do it. I know in the US it went down in kind of flames, but now it's a new time. Maybe it would get some traction within the government systems. And I know that some of the issues previously were lobbyists that are in certain fields, and how is this going to impact different regions of the country based on what their major industries are, was a big driver. But that's a great question.
Definitely food for thought. Do you have any closing thoughts? Anything else you want to add?
I just want to say thank you for attending. Hopefully that you learned some new concepts, maybe that you could apply in your home life or your work life, and hope you consider the University of Toledo for future presentations.
Thanks, Matt. And I certainly want to thank you, Dr. Franchetti. We're so grateful for your time and your talent and for sharing a glimpse into your extensive research into sustainability. And of course, always a big thank you to each and every one of you in our virtual audience for making time to join us in this very first in a series of virtual events led by our College of Engineering Associate Dean. So we hope that you enjoyed the event and will continue to join us in the future. More details to come very soon. Thank you, everyone.